Russia and China showcased their deepening ties as Beijing's top diplomat Wang Yi had a series of meetings during his trip to Moscow, where he also met Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, this meeting comes on the eve of one-year anniversary of Russia's war in Ukraine. China is also expected to reveal its own political solution to the Ukraine conflict this week. China has so far pointedly refused to criticize the invasion of Ukraine while maintaining close ties with its ally, Russia. During the meeting with China's top diplomat, Putin said that cooperation between Beijing and Moscow was important to stabilize the international situation. Putin also told Wang that he was looking forward to a visit by Moscow by Chinese President Xi Jinping and to deepen their partnership.
Развиваются так, как мы и планировали в предыдущие годы. Все идет поступательно, развивается. Мы достигаем новых рубежей. И прежде всего речь, конечно, о...
China's top diplomat said that relations between the two nations could not be influenced by other countries. Wang insisted that the partnership was not directed against any third country and does not give in to pressure.
当前国际形势确实严峻复杂，但是中俄关系历经国际风云的考验，成熟坚韧，稳如泰山。危机和乱象虽然时常出现在我们的面前，但是危中有机，危可转机。
Now, relations between China and the United States have been under serious strain, while Washington has expressed concern that Beijing could provide arms and ammunition to Russia. The move would threaten to escalate the conflict into a confrontation between Russia and China on the one hand and Ukraine and the US-led NATO military alliance on the other. However, Beijing has strongly denied these claims. A Chinese spokesperson said Washington is in no position to make demands after US top diplomat Antony Blinken warned Beijing against providing weapons to Russia.
英雄来自人民。
Now, for more on this, we're now being joined by Professor David S. Goodman from Sydney, Australia. Thank you so much for joining us. David is the Director of China Studies Centre, University of Sydney. How do you assess the significance of this meet, especially so close to the war in Ukraine completing 1 year?
Well, it's a little difficult to analyse, to be frank. To start off with, your comment in the news that they were allies, Russia and China, is not actually correct. When Foreign Minister of China Wang Yi was talking, he didn't talk in those terms. He talked about the relationship between China and Russia. Two things could come out of this, of course. One is China has clearly started to develop ways in which it could suggest to Russia and possibly to the rest of the world that this situation in Ukraine could be resolved. They clearly don't like it. They've said so over the whole year. And about 2 days ago, the foreign ministry in Beijing provided a new outline of what they called a global security initiative, which is something to be discussed, presumably at the United Nations and by everybody, to apply to everybody. Now, of course, it's entirely possible that the United States is correct and there may be some arms supplies going on, but there's no evidence of that. And I personally would be a bit surprised. That would be like China putting its head in the lion's mouth, really, looking for problems where they currently don't exist. But you never know. You do never know.
All right, so you say that's not true, but if we go by the reports, it appears as though China is standing firmly behind Russia, and in fact, it seems to have stepped up support for Russia.
Not standing firmly. They are not standing firmly behind Russia. That's a mistake. I mean, when you say if we go by the reports, what you're talking about is the reports coming out of Washington. Washington at the moment is taking a very aggressive line on, not without reason, on Russia and Ukraine, but they're taking a somewhat more aggressive line on China, which I find difficult to understand.
All right. That being said, how do you see this impacting the war in Ukraine and deepening of ties between China and Russia impacting the war in Ukraine?
Well, I really don't see the deepening of ties between China and Russia. There's a lot of hostility in cultural terms and in political terms between China and Russia, and there has been for a long time. In a sense, they've been forced together by what's going on in Ukraine and the rest of the world's reactions to it. Step back a bit. There's no question that everybody outside Russia, probably, and outside Russia and Belarus, thinks that almost everybody thinks that the invasion of Ukraine is a bad thing. Fine. We all agree about that. But we also need to look at why Russia, I mean, if this situation is going to be resolved without an escalation of war, then one has to start thinking about what needs to be done to resolve the problems that Russia saw. And those problems include the influence of the United States in Ukraine, which is, having, for Russia, from the Russian point of view, is having its arch enemy almost on its doorstep. It's about NATO being too close for comfort for Russia. It's about finding a way to go forward between a Ukrainian government and a Russian government.
All right.
Some of those solutions would not be palatable to everybody, but at the end of the day, something like that's got to happen. Otherwise, there will be a massive conflagration, threatening ratcheting up the nuclear threat, as Putin has been doing, is a step towards actually doing it. It would be a disaster. Now, on the question of Russia-China relations, where that's going at the moment is that China is buying some of Russia's surplus energy. That's for sure. But beyond that, it's difficult to see why people would be talking about the proximity of that relationship, other than, in political terms, they are now both seen as being, particularly by Americans and their allies, as being seen as being the authoritarian dictatorships that are threatening democracy not only in Washington, but all over the world.
All right. Well, Mr. Goodman, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast with your insights on this.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.